All right. Hopefully everyone's having a great Thursday as I'm recording this. I haven't done a one of my gaming recaps in a while. It's one of those things. I also need to update my Ouija board. I have a Ouija.io. I don't call maybe that's what they need to call them, Ouija boards. This kind of I don't know, it's sort of a mind mappy sort of thing. But I don't have one for or I have one. I had one set up in another app, and then I switched apps, and I never quite got a hang of bringing it over. I'll have to do that. So right now you're looking at me. At some point, I might switch over and show what's going on over there, but I don't really have too much going on. So there are a couple lessons I learned, and I'm going to kind of bounce around a little bit because one, I'm not sure where I left off, and two, I want to kind of get into sort of the interesting things. Essentially, at some moment, the players, and I only have two. It's two players, me. They have some hirelings. They got wrapped up in some business, and this is of their own doing, essentially. But they were sort of given potentially multiple quests or multiple things they had to do. They got booted out of the town and were told not to come back to town until they had, if not solved the caves of chaos, essentially. Then determined a few things and kind of brought proof of it back. Well, they were trying to do that. They were struggling to do that. And this is one of those things, I think a lesson here. Is it a lesson? Is it on me? Is it on the players? Probably a bit of both. My players tend to take things extremely literally. So when the local lord, there are basically two towns and they're both under the same lordship. So it's two towns as part of the same Viscounty, I think is what I'm calling it. He's a Viscount, and I'm calling it a Viscounty, though maybe it's just a county. I'm not sure. Anyway, in this area, there's one Viscount who has lordship over these two towns, and the Viscount said to them, "Well, we're closing the towns to you until you do this thing." And they said, "Okay," and they took that extremely literally, like they could not go into towns, to the point where I had to remind them there are no force fields here. The towns aren't walled off. You could potentially go in, but if you get caught, who knows what will happen, but you're going to get booted out. But the end result of that was that they steered clear of the towns. And so as they were getting into the caves of chaos and resources running low, they didn't have opportunities, or they felt like they didn't have. I don't say they felt like, 'cause they never said to me, "Oh, we don't have opportunities," but it was clear that they're running short. Their resources are starting getting ground down, and they don't have the towns to take advantage of. There were towns within like a day more or less, maybe a little bit less, say called 2/3 of a day's kind of travel from where the caves are located in my world. But they felt like these towns were close to them. So they're camping, they're in it kind of rough, but as can happen, and they don't have any kind of cleric types, as can happen, your resources can sort of you're using up your resources quicker, faster than you can recoup them. And so you find yourself spending a lot of time. Well, now we got to spend days camping out to try to get hit points back. And now, even though I'm not rolling that much for encounters, still, okay, an encounter pops up. If you can't avoid it, get around it, then you're already starting out kind of low, and now you're spending more resources, and still you don't have any way to get back. So now you're spending more time in the wilds because you're trying to recover, right? You can end up you can see how you can end at a little bit of I'm not going to call it a death spiral, but a little bit of a circular motion where it's really hard to make. You have to get lucky to kind of make progress, and that's even progress just to kind of base level, in which case then you're going in and trying to get as far as you can in the caves. Then the caves have been tough, and they made some kind of forays, but then as the caves are adjusting to them and things are changing, I had they had beat up the goblins, so that had been kind of cleared out, but I'd put a necromancer in there. The necromancer was using all these dead goblins and minions, and they ran into that. Then they ran into some of the orcs from one of the other areas, and the orcs tried to lure them into, I think in the Caves of Chaos, it's set up as kind of a big storeroom, and the orcs kind of led them in there, and then they set the thing on fire. They had put oil all over it, and the players kind of smelled the oil, and then, but they were like, "Oh, that's it." There was all kinds of stuff in there, and I mentioned how the floor of the place was covered in hay, and there's all this stuff going on, and there was some confusion. They lit the place on fire, and then they were in this kind of sort of rickety storehouse kind of big cave, or not big, but sort of cave area. And then it was very kind of mazy, and they're trying to find their way out amidst the smoke and the fire. So they were having a hard time. And I'm the kind of person who I look at this stuff and I say, well, these are all I'm just riffing with what you're doing. But I could see it was a tough situation for them. Then they're out and they're trying to figure out what to do. And I'm rolling a random encounter and dragon pops up. So I did some thinking. I'm like, okay, great. What is the kind of context? Because like I often try to say with the random encounters, like, what is the context here? It's not just thing just comes from the sky with no reason whatsoever. So I think I might even roll for the type of dragon. I ended up getting a green dragon, which has mist, and something that they've been encountering is this kind of deadly mist. So I came up with this idea as they're kind of talking amongst themselves was, okay, the reason why there's this mist is because some power from the Case of Chaos used magic to essentially use the mist of the dragon to then mist up the place at night. I was riffing off of Excalibur, we're going to call up the breath of the dragon, and it was the fog. So here I'm using the same thing. Okay, the deadly mist comes from the fact they've been harnessing the mist of the dragon, and for some reason, the dragon woke up. The dragon's supposed to be kind of in its lair underneath the woods, and its breath just permeating up and creating sort of acidic mist that comes out at night. Brian Smith says the dragon was vaping. Yeah, maybe a little bit of vaping going on. So the dragon got woken up, and the dragon finds them. And at this point, if I just ran it, okay, combat, it would have been a TPK. But the dragon, and I try to play dragons as sort of Smaug in the sense, from The Hobbit, in the sense of they're, talkative, potentially vain. This is an evil dragon. So like Smaug, apt to be flattered. And I had it sort of threaten the players, and the players gave up information. And the other thing is my players are very earnest. They don't really try to trick too many people too much. So the dragon's telling them like what's going on here. And they're telling the dragon realizes like I've been spelled. Like, I don't know what's happening. Like, and the dragon kind of understood like, okay, I've been spelled. I'm not sure what to do. And I don't know how long I'm going to be, because the dragon could feel that the effect wasn't really off. Like the dragon could feel that, all right, there's been a lull in this power that spelled me. Don't know why, but it's not done with me. And I don't know how to get out of it. It's sense that this is not something that I can just cast Dispel Magic on myself and get rid of. So I'm ensorcelled. I have limited time, but here are some folks who I can boss around. So essentially the dragon guessed them. And it was kind of voluntary. I mean, as voluntary as, hey, I'm going to guess you, or you could sit here and let me guess you, which is to put kind of a quest on them, or we could fight. I can kill you. So the party's like, all right, we'll take the guess. So the dragon magically guessed the two player characters and then one other NPC, and said, now here's what you have to do. You need to go find this thing, because if you can find this thing, and you'll sort of get the image in your mind of what this thing is. This is really to buy me time. I'm like, you're going to get the image in your mind of what this thing is, but it's all fuzzy right now as this guess takes hold. And so this way, if you get this thing and bring it back, you'll be able to free me from this effect that I am under. Okay. And so then in doing that, so now you're on this quest, and the party was kind of going back and forth as whether this was good or not. They didn't really have a choice in the matter. They had to sort of move towards doing this quest, but they were going back and forth. Well, is it good? On the one hand, if the dragon's no longer under the control of the Chaos Cave people, hey, that's good, but it's still an evil, nasty dragon who is now in the countryside, which is bad. But they were torn, but they, again, having no choice, they're like, okay, well, I told them, like, you need to go south, and there's some kind of mountain, and you sense this thing's in the mountain, and you go there. And we had some breaks in the game. So they had started south. So leaving the Caves of Chaos behind, they kind of now were at least sort of on something new where they could go to new things. And they met up with one of the dwarf character met up with another dwarf. I just happened to roll a random encounter, came up dwarf. So they had a nice encounter with a dwarf, which I think they liked. Showed some fellowship. They dismissed a couple of their hirelings and said, please go back to the towns because we can't get in, but we figure you might be able to sneak in, send some messages, have our guys meet us at these other towns to basically just go south out of this Vi County. We know there's more towns and things because the world doesn't end at the edge of this Vi County. So we're going to all going south, go that way to the nearest town, and we're all going to meet up there. We can kind of plan what we're going to do. there's one town that's close to them that they kind of had to go around. So they did something. They were. I tried to tempt them with going to see the town because one of the random encounters that they evaded was a Gorgon. Again, I was rolling up random encounters. So the Gorgon, I think, or at least I think it was a Gorgon. Whatever it is, it's like a metal bull, is what it comes up as. I think it's a Gorgon. It might have been something else, but it's basically like a metal bull, and it just sort of breathes smoke, and it can turn things to stone. And the Caves of Chaos. I just had this idea that caves, as these encounters are being rolled up, this idea that Caves of Chaos is kind of testing things. Okay, yeah, it is a Gorgon. All right, the sort of testing the boundaries, what they can do. So at one point they watched this Gorgon. They're kind of huddled on the side, and they watched this Gorgon kind of come out. They were camped on sort of one side of these woods, the woods that all the mist comes out of. The Caves of Chaos on the other side. And then one side, at one evening, they're camped, and they notice down the way where the main path through the wood is that this Gorgon comes marching out. The Gorgon doesn't see them, and the Gorgon kind of marches out. And they'd done other things, so they didn't know what happened. And so I had this, that they could see that the Gorgon attacked the town, and I'm not even sure what happened, but there would be a lot of stuff turned to stone on the outskirts of town they could see, and I was going to have like this, the wall being damaged, kind of things being done because they just sent this Gorgon out to like just test the defenses and see what's up, basically, the kind of thing. But they didn't. They skirted around it. They decided, we're not going to go. We don't want to go anywhere near the town for their own reasons, not because of the Gorgon, not because of anything else, but just because they really wanted to stay out of sight, essentially. So, and hey, Frederick Ork, welcome. Stay out of sight. So they skirted the town. They went around another way, so that they didn't get to see the Gorgon stuff. They kind of went around the perimeter, and they were able to. I mentioned how the town had kind of cut down trees and things to sort of make a sightline perimeter, but given that they are coming into it, they could simply stay in the thickets and things at the edge of this zone that the town had cleared and just kind of move around it. So they did that, and they moved around it, rolled up another encounter because night was coming on. I think I got ogres. I think it was ogres. And this, I decided, was the caves kind of had sent out a force to actually track the players, is what I decided. So they're in these kind of low hills on the far side of the town. Frederick says a thief should be allowed to sneak in. Well, that might be good, Frederick, but they don't have a thief. They have nobody thiefly. One is kind of a cleric-y fighter type, and the other is kind of a fightery type. The one has maybe some roguish elements, but there's no true thief. I would have allowed them to try to sneak into town and stuff. They didn't want it. Like I mentioned at the front, my players kind of take things sometimes super literally, even though I tried to remind them that it's not. So when the guy put the edict down, the Viscount says, "You may not enter the town," they took that as a literal, we cannot enter the town, and we won't even try. So even if they had a thief, it wasn't a matter of that it would have been super hard to do, because it wouldn't have been. I would have really let them do it. I mean, they could have done something like put some dirt on their faces, mussed up their hair, put a straw out of their mouth, and kind of pretend to be a farmer. I would have let them do it. It would have just been if they would have started promoting who they were, or because they love to say like they're the Quarriors and like, oh, we're the Quarriors. And when they start doing that, the people are going to go, oh, you're not supposed to be here. Words, we got word. But they could have said that I'm John of the Woods and walked, and they probably would have been okay. It wasn't that big. It was meant to be an impediment to them, and it would have hurt in terms of recruiting hirelings if hirelings or whatever started to ask questions, how they would do that. But there was a lot more. They had a lot more latitude than I think that they picked up on. In any case, they didn't try. So they went around the town, and they ended up in these hills on the far side of the town. Here come these, I think they were ogre. No, wait, they might have been trolls, which would have been tough. Yeah, I think it was trolls. Because I remember I was looking at the older pictures with the real long noses and like the smell and everything. Like, okay, these trolls show up. And the party's trying to start their camp, and they spot the trolls. The trolls don't spot them, but the trolls I had this idea that trolls were sort of trying to smell them in the air, sort of smell their humanity, and they're just bobbing back and forth, just sort of doing something like this, moving back and forth, trying to smell the air. And the party seems to be pretty sure that they're going to get spotted sooner rather than later. So one of the players used their abilities that they have to kind of go really fast. They can sort of bump up their physical attributes, sort of go superhuman. They wanted to go for sort of this was one of them. I had two of the players, one of whom had to leave the game, wanted sort of witchery kind of Jedi sort of stuff. So one of them, and this player who's in the game, I gave them their abilities are kind of more around the sort of physical Jedi stuff, like you would see in the Phantom Menace, where they can kind of go like speed boost and kind of, or he can do like a strength boost. So he decided to kind of speed boost and run and kind of pull the trolls away, which he did because he can go faster, and even the trolls running weren't really going to be able to catch him. And he ran off into the woods, and then the trolls ran after them into the woods, and then the rest of the party was kind of like the other player and the hirelings like, I guess we better kind of follow them and run off into the woods. Well, it turned out that the woods that they were running off in were the same woods that they'd gone into a long, long time ago when they were on one of their first things. They wanted to visit like a wise woman witch type. Same woods. They were in the same area. I think even I had the one player who was, because the player who ran hadn't joined the game yet, and so there was only one. I told like, you know where you are in terms of you've been in this area before, and you know that these woods, and that's just where the player went. That's just where the trolls went. So the player goes, all right, running in. So they end up in the Feywild once again, and it was neat because I got to. This is the first time they'd really revisited a place like this that they'd been to before. So the first time they'd visited this place ages ago, they went through the woods. They ended up kind of definitely passing through sort of a permeable Feywild kind of border, or I'm not going to call it Feywild, kind of permeable border into the fairy wilderness, and they end up coming up to a basically like a Wicker Man type structure, and there was some poor guy trapped inside the Wicker Man. They end up letting the guy out, and that's something that hasn't come back yet, but they end up letting that guy out. So this time they end up they're spread out, but the witch, or this, it's really a fae, a powerful fae lives there, who kind of takes on the guise of sort of a witch or wise woman for when people come to visit humans from the human side. Come in. Brian says it was Nick Cage, wasn't it? I wouldn't have gone with Nick Cage. I would have gone with the original Edward. What was his name? Edward. Was it Ed Woodward? Forget the guy's name. Who was the Equalizer on the 80s TV show? Who was in the original, the good version of the Wicker Man movie? I would have made it him. But in any case, so they get split up, and they find the Wicker Man again, or one of them finds the Wicker Man again, and the trolls are now trapped inside. Because I just assumed that the trolls were not any match for this Fae person power, and so they're in the Wicker Man, and so then the party ends up reuniting at the witches in quotes house, and at one point the Wicker Man gets lit up, and the trolls go down in flames. No bees. No bees. And the Wicker Man goes up in flames, and the trolls are what's the word? Engulfed in flames, and I guess just burned. And there's another word for burned, but in any case, they're gone, and they end up at the witch's house. And they'd been here before. One of the things they'd done before was they had made a bargain with the witch. So they were well aware that you can bargain with this person. And the first bargain they made was they were carrying a message. And they made the deal, like they wanted to know like what was going on in the larger world, like something big was happening, and they wanted to know who was behind it. And they bartered the contents of their message. The witches wanted the witches said, just let me see your message, I'll give it back to you. The message, the witch took their message, switched it, but I still haven't decided what she switched it with, or what her game is with that. But anyway, she took the message, read it, created a different message, put it back in the back thing, and gave it to them. And then they ultimately got the answer to this question, which isn't super useful to them at the moment, but it's something they've been able to throw at people, and people are like, whoa, how do you know that name? So they've been able to kind of, they've used it a few times, it just sort of in a, like you're not supposed to be, you shouldn't, that's kind of above your pay grade. How do you know this thing? So maybe they've gotten some advantage out of it, but it hasn't been something super helpful to them in the short term, though in the long term it might be. Terrence says, conflagrated, maybe. Hey, Punk Soup, conflagrated, immolated. I think, yep, Brian Smith, that was what I was looking for. It was often immolated, never duplicated. Though I do kind of like burninated. Yeah. So now they've kind of come full circle where they got to revisit this witch and sort of revisit and see these things in a little bit of a different context. And now they're back and they've got problems, and the witch offers them some solutions. And the witch says, like, hey, we can make a bargain, but you got to pick something. So they were trying to think about, well, what are these things that we have going on? They got a lot kind of on their shoulders. They're cursed with these rings. And the witch said, I can't help you with the rings. What I can do is I can either help you with, they basically gave him a choice of, I can make it so that because remember, the Viscount had kicked them out of the towns. I said, and so they determined we got two options other than the rings, which is another thing. We can make it so the Viscount, so the things they wanted where we can ask for the Viscount to basically forget us. So we'll be forgotten in terms of not being allowed in town. So basically you have to wipe that slate clean or remove the dragon curse. You get to pick one of those two. They went back and forth and they decided, and they were thinking, to them, like, which one should we do? Should we do should we get rid of the dragon curse? Should we get rid of should we let them let us back in town? They determined that, and I kind of hinted to them, I was like, look, there are other towns and other places. Like, the world is far bigger than this Viscounty, and things can be forgotten. Like, it's not the ban that the Viscounts put on them. It's just one of, like, we put up the poster or the wanted poster or whatever. Like, it's not mystically, spiritually, magically binding. It is just it's a very conventional, I'm going to tell the soldiers not to let you in. And they can even forget about you within 6 months when other things are happening, right? It's them putting it on the same thing as, we have this curse that's, we are literally bound magically by a curse, or make the guy forget about us. But I didn't make the decision for them. But I didn't say, like, you could probably, the one could probably be worked with, whereas the other one is more of a compulsion that is much more, I mean, in every way is more serious. But so they ended up making the right choice, saying, okay, what do you need us to do? What we want is to have the dragon curse removed. And the witch said, okay, what I need you to do is take this parcel, this kind of package, to take it. We're in the fairy wilds. Take it to this court, the court of the Pentacle. I've given in this world, the fairies kind of, they arrange themselves in the courts, kind of sort of related to the tarot. So they have the Pentacle Court, and you have to give it to the page of the Pentacle Court. Give it to the page, and then do that, and then I'll get rid of the curse. And because you're in the kind of fairyland, and you're not in sort of the back in the, I don't know, the mundane world, it very much mutes the dragon's curse while you're here. It's still there, and you can still feel it, but it's not as compulsive because you were literally in another plane. So you're a little bit, while you're here, you're kind of safe from it. It's not a permanent safety, but you can kind of do this, and you won't be outed to the dragon right away. Like, you won't suffer for it as much. You can kind of work with it. So, like, okay, we're going to do this. And she had said, like, it'll take like a couple of days, and you're going to go and you're going to get there. Great. Now, in my world, the Fairylands, it's very much about memory. And when she says it's like something's a place is a couple of days away, it kind of makes it a couple of days for them. Like, if they had been like masters of the place, they could pretty much almost step out of one domain and go directly into another. But because that they were given this context of it was so far away, and they don't kind of know better, no different than that, kind of, it creates this spacing of it being a couple of days away. So they have to travel. So they get out, and I talk about them going back through the woods, but going through a different direction on kind of a path. And they end up hitting a road. And she had said, like, you get to this road, you're going to turn, you're going to go. And I think part of the reason for this is that I think, which makes sense to me, is that the way I'm just explaining it, when you're of the fairy, you understand it implicitly, you can move that way. But for a non-fairy brain to kind of comprehend it, super difficult. So I don't even know if them as kind of humans, and why in the dwarf, could really wrap their brain around it without just going mad the way things kind of organize there. So by giving them directions, it creates this linkage for them to be able to move through. Because the other thing is, you could get hopelessly lost if you don't know, because you're just kind of wandering around this sort of quasi space in between these realms. And these dominions, like the witch's dominion, like the court of the pentacles, they're all kind of held together by the forces of the people who live there, and the fact that they're strongly in the memories of people, or in this case, the fairies. So that the more you're remembered, and the more power and also memory of beings who live in those spaces, keep them coherent. If you are forgotten, your domain is forgotten, you lose that coherence and you can kind of become detached and you're sort of floating out in the middle of nowhere. So these concepts are kind of playing. They don't know any of this, but this is kind of playing beneath the scenes. Brian Smith says, before you know it, you're wandering the aisles of Walmart for eternity. Could be. So they go out there, they get in the road, and they, again, random encounter, came up with these, I forget what they came up with. It might have been kobolds or somebody else, but I have a custom version, these kind of hyena men that I used. And so I had the hyena men show up again, which is again a callback, because way back in the beginning, when they were on their way to the witch's house for the first time, hyena men were stalking them and never caught them. So the dice delivered. And so here I was able to then wrap this around and say, now you find these hyena men have set up a blockade on the road. And who are they? So they come up on the blockade, and they come up kind of slowly and warily, but they kind of come up, and the hyena men, I've kind of played them. I sort of played them very sort of canine-like. They're very much about sort of being on this kind of mission, being having this kind of purpose, which was set out to find the barber surgeon, which again ties back originally. There's this whole mystery where the message that the witch traded them for was a message that this barber surgeon urgently wanted delivered to the Viscount, which was intercepted by the witch through the party. The party, these guys, their whole original purpose was to be messengers, and they are the worst messengers in my world. I think they've been given like 3 things to deliver, and they've only successfully delivered one of them. And they're the third thing. It's terrible. So when they had gotten back, they found out that this barber surgeon had disappeared, and his shop had burned down, and all this bad stuff had happened. But they never really pulled on that thread again at the barber surgeon. So here I was able to kind of bring it out again, where these hyena men are still out searching for the barber surgeon, who I guess they've been told or thought might be coming through these woods. And of course they're suspicious because this party are humans. The barber surgeon's a human. So could they be one of the barber surgeons? And it was fun because the player who had been through was like, oh, like I remember this and this or that. And so they ended up having to make a deal with these hyena men. They had to take one of the hyena men with them to kind of prove, it's kind of this weird thing of them proving that they weren't the barber surgeon, but helping them get to the barber surgeon, all this stuff. And the hyena guy was there, going to go with them to kind of make sure that they were on point and doing these things, and that they were going to be allowed through. So they ended up making this deal, like, all right, this hyena man's going to come with you and kind of watch you and make sure you're delivering and can do this or that. It's like, fine. They're like, fine. We'll take him. Originally, the hyena guys wanted them to leave a hostage too. They want to kind of swap, like, leave us a hostage. They were big on it. Was kind of it was a joke for a while because they were really big on wanting hostages, and it was just all them trying to talk their way around not having to leave a hostage. And in the end, they kind of, in a sense, they kind of took a hostage. Though, you know, the hyena guy is under his own volition. Brian Smith says, yes, a hyena auditor. Exactly. So they end up going on their way with this hyena auditor in tow, which was kind of good because it gave them sort of an extra set of hands, extra body to go on. So they went on. I tried to lure them into this kind of sort of fair up on the side of the road where actually, sorry, I forgot something. So this is kind of the big thing that had happened in the recent game. The bad weather came up. I rolled some weather, got bad weather, and I talked about in the Feywild that literally the moon and sun will be out at the same time, and kind of part of the world will be in daylight and part of the world will be the night. And the storm just rushed upon them, like super serious. And now it's just like storming and raining and crashing down, just rain, crashing. And they're looking for where they are. And it's kind of swampy on one side, and it's sort of these, like, a little bit more raised ground. But I was telling them you see kind of standing stones, and I was taking a lot of inspiration from The Hobbit for this particular moment, like when they're coming to the barrow down. So this bad weather's coming upon them. They can see some castle in the distance, and I have somebody ride up on horseback and offer them to come to their keep. Say, oh, come out of this weather, or you can come with me. And they're like, heck no, we don't know who you are. We don't trust you. We're going to stick it out. And he's like, yep, fair enough. And he goes off. They didn't trust him. And I don't know what I was going to do with that. And I might actually bring it back very soon, this person, but they didn't take him up on the offer. So now it's just raining and storming, and water just flooding down the road. And it's just awful. And so they go to one of these raised areas where one of these standing stones is, and it was very much in my mind, just the way in the Hobbits. And no, it wasn't in the Hobbit. It was in the Lord of the Rings, actually, where they kind of falling asleep, or and then they end up in the barrow, or anyway, was it Frodo wakes up in the barrow and everyone else is tied up? Same thing where I had them roll a couple of saves and they failed, and suddenly they're kind of winking out and they're ending up in the barrows. And the dwarf ended up being the one who's kind of aware and not sort of trapped. And so they ended up finding these. So they've been in sort of this barrow, I guess, or a sort of a dungeon, essentially. It's kind of a funereal sort of dungeon. They find these alcoves, and the other people have been placed in these alcoves with these heavy metal bars over them. And the concept I was going here from was these were lead bars to kind of hold sort of Fae down. It was this idea of, like, you could put a fairy like body in there, and like if it was dead, and put this cold iron bar, and it would kind of keep them there. The idea of fairies not liking cold iron was kind of the vibe I was going for. They ended up ended up waking everybody up, and I think they ended up taking one of the cold iron bars with them, and they were moving around trying to find their way out now, because there was no doorway. When the dwarf kind of came to his senses, he was in like the end of like a cul-de-sac, or just a dead end kind of a corridor. They didn't know where they were, didn't know how to get out. They were just in there. So they're moving around. They encountered some ghouls. Yes, ghouls. They ended up doing really quick work of them. I was pretty impressed. I mean, it was some lucky rolls. These ghouls came running around at them. I think it was 3 of them. And before the ghouls could do anything, the party had just wiped them out. It was pretty impressive. I think they were feeling it. So they came around a corner and they start seeing these closed, these slab doors. A couple of them were open, which, as I was telling them, and I was using a Dyson Logos map. I'm like, yeah, these are open a little bit because this is where the ghouls came from. One of these ones one of the ones that's open, they went in, they found some loot. They found like a magic dagger, and I just rolled up some random treasure. They found a magic dagger, and they think they might have found something else. They're like, oh, great. So then they go into another one. And then I'm like, okay, you start seeing, and here's where I threw out the yellow mold, which I just love yellow mold. So I was like, this one's got yellow mold in there. I wanted to see how they would do. So they found there was like a spattering in the yellow mold as the ghoul would come out and sort of scattered some of the yellow mold. And I think the dwarf, and the way it is in the book is you kind of roll some dice, and something disturbs it, like you stab it, and sometimes something happens, and sometimes something doesn't. And I think the dwarf, I forget exactly what happened with the rolls, but the dwarf ended up kind of triggering it, but he was standing back. So I had him just kind of get into a bad kind of coughing fit and like all teary-eyed, whatever. But I didn't have him roll a death save. I'm like, you're far enough, whatever you did. I forget exactly what they did. It was like, you did enough. But then the other player decided to get kind of like up close and personal. It's like, oh, maybe we can use the stuff, and like really got in there and tried to scrape some off. It went off, failed his death save. They had one goblin sort of companion, kind of sort of companion hireling there. The goblin failed his death save, so then I have both laid out, and they're both in this dying state. And I've talked about before with the way I run poisons and things. I don't like the instant death. I just don't find it much fun. They just die. It's like, no, you're dying. So I was like that opening of, hey, you're dying, but this means somebody can save you. And I made a separate video where I kind of went through the sequence, and it was a shorter video. You could check it out, where I kind of talked through the way I was thinking about it. In any case, the goblin died, but they were able to essentially stabilize the PC. But he's not in a good way. So in the map I was looking at, there was kind of a central area, and I thought there's some kind of undead fairy kind of force under here. So I had this fairy voice kind of reach out to the player who's unconscious, being like, hey man, you don't look so good. I can help you though. You look terrible. I don't think you're going to make it, but I can help you. You just got to let me in. You let me in and I'll help you. And the player, I think, thought that they were dying. Their character was dying. And they kind of just took the thing at its word. Like, you're right, I'm not doing well. And maybe you can help me. And I think maybe said, like, what are you going to do? And I think the thing was like, well, I'm going to do what I'm going to do. I'm just going to save you from the void is what I'm going to do. Hey, Jorga. Yes, we are live now. The players basically didn't ask too many questions. It was kind of like, well, this doesn't sounds like you're going to do something, whatever. And the thing's like, yeah, yes, I am, but it's going to save you from the void. So, you know, you're going to accept it or you're going to not accept it. So the player accepts it and then became basically like a vampire spawn. Became undead, was obviously roused immediately from their sort of comatose state. Their cursed ring came off and then promptly went on the dwarf, who's now has all 3 of the cursed rings because he's dead now. The curse they didn't find out till later, but even the dragon curse stopped for them because they're dead. Like the curse ends when you die. So being undead now, all those things were lifted off of them, but now they're sort of attached in some way to this undead force, who then told them like, all right, now that you're gonna have to do something for me. Your payment, or I've done this to you to help you, in a fashion, but now you have to do this thing for me, which was also to go to the Pentacle Court. So you had to go get this thing from the Pentacle Court. So the Pentacle Court has some kind of, I forget what I called it exactly, some MacGuffin essentially that's in the Pentacle Court that this thing wants. And my reasoning is maybe this thing sensed that they were going there, and so that's why it attached itself to them, is in terms of why it's sending them to the same place. But hey, you're going, you got to get this thing and bring it back for me. And and the guy's like, fair enough. So they did some more adventures. They got out of the barrows. They ended up finding their way. There was that castle again. They went around the castle, took the long way around the castle, and came back on the road. That's when I tried to, and I let the person know. So they have some rules now as a vampire spawn. I didn't say they're a vampire spawn. I think I gave them a name, but essentially I'm taking a lot of inspiration from kind of vampire spawn, right? They're stronger at night. They have some kind of ability to sort of mesmerize some folks, but they need to feed on blood. Otherwise they can't get back any kind of health, or they can't get their dice back for abilities, because they have kind of a dice pool that they use for abilities. They can't get their dice pool. They can't refill it, except they have to feed on living flesh and blood. So now the player's like, well, am I at full health? I'm like, no, you're just not dead. Well, I need to feed. Oh, I got to feed. I got to get back up to full health. So he's all this thing about wanting to feed. And I had written in there that if you go down to 0, you're basically like, you're laid out, but you're not quite actually dead yet. If somebody like gives you blood, you can come back, which will be important in a minute. So I tried to have, there was like a traveling like carnival, to sort of fun time, happy fun time little spot that they get to. I was hoping to get them to sort of spend some time in there. And I thought like, well, maybe there'll be something fun in there, but they're like, nope, we're heading down. We're keep going straight. So fine. So they end up not being able to get quite to their destination. They had to camp again. And the player's like, I got to feed. And he doesn't have to sleep or eat. So he's like, I'm going to take watches. That's fine. I'll be up all night, but I got to feed. So he decides to go hunting by himself. I think he's learned now that's probably not the smart play. So he goes hunting by himself. I rolled up to see, well, let me see if there's anything around here. So I roll because he's hunting, he's looking around, and he gets a griffin. And I tell him how he can see kind of the silhouette in the darkness of this griffin. And he can kind of see in the dark now, but he can really just see like blood. So you can just kind of see blood flowing in living creatures. He can't see, it's kind of how he sees. So everything else is just sort of vague, kind of gray, but he can see just blood pulsing in bodies. But he could tell from the kind of blood shape, it's kind of equine, but sort of not. And it's kind of big, and it sort of seemed another way, but he decided like, I'm going for it. I don't know why he decided to go for it, but he had a spear. I think he used his hand crossbow, took a shot at it. It missed. And the griffin charged the heck out of him. And basically just the griffin came in, just ragdolled the F out of him. I mean, he was dead in the first attack. Like the griffin charged in, hit him. He's dead. I mean, he's 0, gone. Kind of ragdolled him. And of course, it's not good eating because it's this kind of gross undead corpse thing. So the griffin just flies off. But at this point, it woke everybody up. They come running to find that he's like, essentially, they don't know whether he's dead or not, but he's not moving because he's kind of like quasi-dead. He's mostly dead. Like, he needs Miracle Max. So he needs blood. He needs Miracle Max, essentially, to put some blood in him. And the other player who they had kept this from each other, or the one player, the undead player, had kept it from the party. Rasmus says, I'm dead again. Pretty much. he'd hinted at what had happened to him, but hadn't said it. But it was kind of not unobvious because I talked about how his skin had lost all color and all this stuff had happened, and like he didn't look great. And then he did get some kind of glamoring because I had when they left the Barrows, I had the undead fae, his patron, essentially put a spell on him to make him seem lively because he's no way going to get close to anybody if he looks like a walking corpse, right? So it's like, okay, I'm going to give you this kind of illusion. But that illusion dropped off when he died or went semi-dead. So now he just looks like a corpse. So they decide to carry him into town. And I'm thinking about this, and I'm wondering, should I say anything? Because they're literally the dwarf is walking through into this town with a corpse over his shoulder. I mean, maybe you don't notice it's a corpse if you don't look closely, but still, it's a human, literally over his shoulder. That's how they're carrying him. Because I was thinking in my mind, okay, what could they do? All right, so he needs blood, and the other player may have determined he needs blood. I think he did. So there are a lot of things you could do here. You got some hirelings. You could try to say, like, okay, we're gonna find a little glade. You guys sit tight with him. I'm gonna try to go into town and get the lay of it. I'm gonna come back out. See what I can figure out, like some way to kind of stealth it up, be sort of sneaky. Like what can I do? But they didn't do that. They're like, no, we're just gonna walk him into town. I'm like, all right, for real? You're gonna just take this corpse and go walking in town? So fine. So they get in through there's a town, and I try to play the Fae as being really weird. I want the thing to be weird and dreamy, and all this thing I've been talking about, memories and coherence. So the idea. But right now it just feels like it's a normal town. Gates, city guards, fine. So I'm just rolling with that right now. But I'm thinking, like, I need to weird it up. Like, how am I going to weird this place up? What am I going to do? So they're going. So they decide to go find themselves a barber surgeon. Who knows? Maybe they felt like maybe we'll run into the barber surgeon from our backstory. He'll just be in town. Brian says could have the undead force be some sort of cat and give the player 9 lives. Maybe. I didn't do that. I just said it's going to knock you out, and then blood can bring you back. Bryce said they could have stuffed them in a barrel. Yeah, they could have gotten a barrel stuff. I mean, right. Could have put hay over them, put them in many things. But nope, we're just going to carry him on our shoulder. All right. So they walk into town carrying this body on their shoulder. They end up finding a barber surgeon, and they slam the thing down on this, just basically on the table in the barber surgeon's shop. It's like, what can you do? The barber surgeon looks at it and it's like, you brought me a corpse. And the player's like, no, not a corpse. I'm telling you, this is something different. And the surgeon's looking at him like, I'm telling you, man, this is a dead body. Like, I don't know if you know, but I don't think there's much I can help you with a dead body. And then the player's like, and the player's telling him, like, listen, I am telling you, this is not just a dead body. Okay. He is, essentially he's undead. All right. He's undead. And so then the barber surgeon's like, so you're telling me you brought me an undead into town. You came into the town. You brought in an undead abomination into town, brought him into my door. That's what you're telling me now. The player's like, yep, that's what I'm telling you. The barber surgeon's like, okay. All right. And I'm like, I feel like I'm just handing the players, I'm just letting them out rope to hang themselves with. Because if the answer is to someone telling you, did you bring an undead abomination into my town? The answer should be telling them is like the opposite of when someone asks you if you're a god in Ghostbusters, you say yes. If someone asks you if you are bringing in an undead abomination into their town, you say no. You do not tell them yes. But they told the barber surgeon yes. And then they said, here, I'm going to give you some coin. And I'm going to go out because he wanted to go. I'm going to go out and see if I can find a market around here. And the barber surgeon starts a bargain. It's like, well, how about I just buy him off you? You brought me this thing. Maybe I can keep it on the down low. The barber surgeon's kind of thinking, like, maybe I can make some money off of this or some discoveries. Like, maybe I can do this. And they're like, no, he's not for sale. Just watch him while I go out. So the player goes out with the hirelings to try to find the market. While he's finding the market, the barber surgeon starts cutting open the guy and doing like a biopsy on the thing. So when the player goes and finds like a rabbit or something and buys a rabbit in the market and brings it back, he sees that the barber surgeon has like cut the guy open and he's got like the rib spreader in there or some kind of contraption, and he's like poking around, kind of checking it out. And then the player like cuts the rabbit's throat, and the blood pours into the mouth of the other guy, and he just wakes up like, his ribs kind of hit his body kind of reconstitute. And I talk about how the the rib spreader kind of just goes like flies off and as it like closes up, and the barber surgeon's like, well, this is fascinating. Like, how much do you want for the abomination? Because I feel like I could, because he's not like because he seems like it's not a mindless like zombie or skeleton. It seems to have some intelligence. Doesn't seem to be innately hostile. It's like, how much? Let me pay you for the thing. And they're like, no sale. It's like, no, really, I'll pay you. Nope. So the barber surgeon is wondering what to do here and decides to go, all right, fine, you can go. I'm not going to hold you here. You can leave. But of course, as soon as they leave, the barber surgeon goes to the town guard and said, yeah, that's an undead abomination. I'd love to study him when you catch them. Like, could you go take care of that? So I had this little chase of them going around with these town guards coming. But again, this is not weird. This is not weird enough. This is not what should be happening, because as I'm narrating them kind of trying to see if they can lose the guards in town and kind of give them the slip. I'm like, this is not what this should be. I'm thinking this is not the Pentacle Court. This is supposed to be these big kind of fey powers. This is not enough. Something else has to be going on. I'd been watching the first season of one of these DC shows. It's on HBO Max. I forget what it's called now as I'm trying to bring it up. But it's like the Suicide Squad, these kind of goofy misfit heroes. The name will come to me in a minute. Terrence, nope, no, not filled with squirrels, unfortunately. What was it called? Not the Suicide Squad. What are they called? Doom Patrol. And this thing came in Doom Patrol where a couple of the guys got trapped, ended up being trapped in basically a snow globe. And it became a thing of like they'd gone it, like they were trying to, like, there was a guy who was gonna like had script written on him. And there was a whole thing about ending the world. But the part of this thing was like this big eye in the sky showed up, and then some of them got caught in a snow globe. And I thought, like, all right, I know I feel like I get what's happening. So these little guards are chasing him around the town, but I'm like, I got it now. So they've lost the guards. They're kind of wandering around. And I talk about how this eye appears in the sky. This eye just starts looking around. And they're like, holy crap. And then I talk about how this beam comes out of the eye and just starts wiping out the town. Just going across like this laser, like, and I talk about how it's not like exploding the town, or it's like the town, like it's hitting blocks so they can just see where it's just stuff just like just not being anymore, just like wiping it out of, like, just, yeah, unmaking it. Essentially, like even more than kind of a disintegrate, just like unmaking it. And they get the sense that the eye is looking for them, and they're like, where the heck are we? What did we do? And I'm thinking to myself, like, yes, this is what I wanted. This is weird enough. So this eye is beam is just like boop, boop, and they're like running around. They're like going like, oh gosh, what can we do? And I decided to throw another log on the fire. Every once in a while, the player who's got the undead patrons kind of reaches out to the patron, but for like piddling stuff, like, can you help me? Can you do this? And most of the time, the patron doesn't answer. Oh, and this is Spindrift Blood Orange Tangerine for the working man, by the way, if I've forgotten. I've been slacking on calling off when I'm drinking. Always for the working man. I-beam's coming. He's, doing it. So I had the patron reach out and say, like, this is not how things were supposed to go down. This was not how it was supposed to go down. So I'm gonna do something, and you're gonna spit up something, and it's gonna be an aid to you. So the eye is, wiping out the town as they're going, it's just falling out of being. And the player's like, okay. And he gags up like this, like, black blob that just creates a hole in the world. Essentially, all they just see back is just black. They just spit it up, and it's black. It's like not a hole. It just looks like just blackness. Like they're like something just cut through the very fabric of space and time. And he's looking down at this thing. He's like, I think I've been told we should jump in, as this eye is beaming across, wiping out the town. And so they had no other options at this point that they could see. So they're like, all right. So they jump in, and I show them as they're jumping in, that they're able for a moment to see where they're in some other room, the snow globe kind of thing, which this kind of fey sort of person is holding this globe, just kind of eyeballing it, looking at it, and they just kind of see it as they sort of fly out in this other space, and then they disappear. And they dropped very unceremoniously, like the time bandits and time bandits falling from like this hole in the sky onto a side of a hill, tumble down into some muck and mud, and then they lay there in kind of a gully running through the hills. Brian Smith, exactly. Just your classic vomitous portal. Exactly. So they're wondering, well, where are we? They follow this gully up a little ways, comes to, because I rolled a random encounter. It wasn't a dragon. I forget what it was, but there's something in this cave, and it's kind of dark now. So the one vampire kind of undead player can see it, but it's something large, and it's kind of resting, and you can kind of see in the dark this sort of just the very, 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 just a little bit of that glow from the blood, but oh, it's huge. Ooh, there's a lot of blood there. Ooh, but of course, it's also huge, and they're also getting a sense of like a dread coming from this thing. So like, okay, maybe we should go the other way. So they go the other way, and they end up at a lake. And I wasn't sure where I'd put them, but I was like, I'm not going to gift them forward progress on essentially their backwards progress. So they were dumped out somewhere else in the Feywild, not closer to there. I mean, they were pretty much where they needed to be in terms of their original kind of quest, but I'm like, you're not getting out that easy. I'm not going to move you forward by you guys goofing around, essentially. So they were dumped somewhere outside now the domain of the Pentacle Court. Haven't really determined exactly where that is yet, but they end up in this kind of following this gully down to like a forest lake. And on the far side of this forest, they can see a castle. It almost seems bright. It's kind of glimmering, but actually it's sort of, actually, no, it's sorry. At this point, they don't see it's bright and sort of glimmering because it's kind of nightfall. Woods are dark around them, but they can see on the far side, there's just some like little torches in the windows kind of thing. But it's on the far side of this lake. It's at least a few miles away. They're not going to be able to get around there through daylight. So they camp for the night. The player goes out to hunt again. This time is smart enough not to just attack the first thing he sees, which I rolled again and got a basilisk. So he went around one side, tried to hunt, but when this serpent, he was up in a tree, which was good for him because the basilisk came underneath the trees to drink at the lake. And he looked down at this thing and was like, I'm not liking it. Because I said it was like, probably about a man's length, maybe longer, sort of serpentine, and it's moving around. He's like, yeah, I'm not messing with that by myself. And I was thinking to myself, that's a good call. Smart move. A little wisdom now. Don't just attack the first thing you see. So they camp, and the next day they decide to go around the other side of the lake. But they're hunting because the player is, he wants to feed so bad. Because the one thing is he is low on health and he can't get it back without feeding. So it is high priority. Priority number one now is feed. So they're walking around this lake and they're looking for food. And I'm rolling up and I get a pig. So they find tracks for a pig. But I'd done some other rolls because I'm rolling kind of like for multiple things, like where creatures might have intersected. So I rolled up the pig, but I also rolled up a hill giant. So I decided that the hill giant had tracked the pig and killed it, but it's there. So they end up following the pig trail and they find it intersecting with much larger tracks, humanoid tracks, and then they follow and they find this hill giant encampment. And I took a lot of inspiration from those Alive or Alone, those Alone seasons. So it basically had made its own little kind of semi-permanent lodge, little cabin. He's got a big dog and he's in there sleeping. The giant's sleeping with his dog, the big kind of hound dog in there. And then above, like hanging over a tree above the thing, is hanging the carcass of the pig that had been killed. Now they're trying to get at the pig carcass. And there was a little bit of, I could have prevented this by pointing out to the player, which I did not, that the key piece of information on their character sheet was they need to feed on the flesh or blood of living things, not things that were freshly killed or butchered or hanging from it, but like alive. And the pig was not alive. But I did not share this piece of information. Because I thought, part of me thought, like, it's kind of, isn't that in sort of the undead thing as like living things? But I was like, all right, you're going to do this. If you guys decide to do this, you're going to do this. And yes, they decided to do this. And their plan ended up being a combination of for one, they were trying to like hook it and bring it down. But I'm like, it's actually fairly high up there. So then they decided to send the dwarf up the tree, who manages to climb this tree, get out on the branch. And then they're like, okay, we're going to saw off. At first, he's like, oh, can I just saw off and like lift up the pig? And I told him, like, what kind of pig do you think this thing is? This is like a hog, like one of those massive wild boars. This isn't a piglet. Like, you can't just lift it up with your hand. It's bigger than you are. It's like several hundred pounds worth of pig here. Oh, okay. Well, so I'm going to cut the line. It's going to drop, and that's going to wake up the, wake up the giant or something. And I'm like, well, sure. Brian Smith says ghouls eat corpses. Okay, maybe they do. In any case, it's Brian Smith. It's irrelevant in my situation because I literally wrote on the thing I handed him is you must eat the flesh of living things. So it was on his sheet. So regardless of whether there are some undead that eat actual dead, got to eat the blood of the living. Blood of the living. So they came up with this whole kind of idea. So at one point they woke the giant up. The giant comes out and is looking around to kind of seeing what's going on. I hadn't seen them yet, but it was like now I was like, what's going on? And I totally missed something because they had this hook line that they had put and it was hanging right there, and I just missed it. So then it was like, so now their new plan was, okay, the dwarf is going to cut the line from going to have the pig fall. At the same time, the other guy was going to trigger his super strength and super speed to knock over the cabin, grab the pig, and run off. And I don't know. They had various ideas of what was supposed to happen when this all happened. The player was like afterwards, like, well, I thought it was going to work like this. And I told him, I was like, how? They were like, well, I thought by knocking over the cabin, it would distract the giant. I'm like, well, it kind of did, but like the pig hits the cabin, you knock it over. It all kind of happens at once. His line of looking is going to be up and then up. Oh, my cabin. Oh, up and see the dwarf, which is what happened. I don't know how the cabin falling over is supposed to distract the giant away from the pig falling, away from looking at the dwarf. In any case, it did work sort of. With the player got the pig, ran off using a super strength and super speed, ran off into the woods with this pig, at which point I alerted them to the fact that it's not alive, but I'm going to give you a gimme. It's going to work a little bit, but it's not going to do this ever again. I'm like, you guys put a lot of thought and work into this. I'm going to throw you a bone. And I think I said, you can roll a die and you'll get a little bit back, but this is your warning of this ain't working again. Living beings. It says there on your sheet. You'd had that sheet in front of you. That's what it says, but I'm going to throw this bone so you're going to get a little bit back. But you're out of whatever's happening with the dwarf and the giant, you're kind of out of the mix because it takes at least a minute or so to feed, which is going to be any kind of combat scenario is already over with. And I did a little fee-fi foam. I smell the blood of human beings, which I thought was kind of fun too with the giant. They're in the fairyland. That's a fairy giant. I'm like, yeah, this is why not? I threw that in there. So now the giant's staring up the dwarf, trying to poke him with a spear. The dwarf is holding onto the tree branch. At some point, he manages to get back to the tree trunk, decides to climb even higher. He had a wand that he knew of with one charge of fireball, which he fireballed down. Actually took a good chunk of damage, the giant did, and the giant's hound. Didn't kill any of them, but it wounded the dog pretty good. And the dog was running around trying to put the fire out, and I had the smell of burning dog hair and the dog kind of whimpering. And then the giant was taking down a peg, but now he's high up in the tree, and the giant's pondering whether to throw his spear at him. But there was actually an axe nearby that he'd been using to hack down the tree trunks for his cabin. So he grabs his axe and says, "Hey, dwarf, you can either become my hostage, or I'm going to cut down the tree, and we'll see how you feel about fighting when you hit the ground." Basically. Now, the dwarf had two wands. He had the wand that he had identified having the fireball, which he used. He had another wand. He didn't know what spell was on there yet. He decided to just just try to see if he could even though he hadn't identified, see if he could trigger it. So I had to make some dice rolls, and then I rolled to see what spell he cast. And I actually rolled to see because I hadn't determined what's. I don't usually, like, a lot of times I won't decide what's on something like a wand until they either get around to using it or identifying it. So I hadn't rolled up. So I rolled it up. It was a wand of haste. So we hasted the giant. So the giant had some fun with that and starts kind of taking some swings at the tree. It's like, you can come down, or like, I think maybe one other good swing and this tree's going to come down all on its own and we can figure it out. So the dwarf decides to come down the tree and surrenders to the giant. All right. Then the rest of the party show up. And the giant says, listen, I got your man here, or your dwarf. What will you trade me for the dwarf's life? And they got nothing. I mean, I'm like, okay, granted, they haven't gotten a lot of loot because of their misadventures and everything. That's fair. They did have a magic. I think the one guy's got a magic sword or a magic dagger, but he either forgot about it or declined to mention it. But they were trying to throw out stuff like, oh, I got some silver. And the giant's like, listen, currency is no good. I don't need that stuff. And they're also doing things like, well, we can help you rebuild your cabin. I'm like, I can do that myself. The cabin you knocked over, yeah, I'll do that myself. Oh, we can help you get another boar. Like, I can do that myself. Like, I feel like I'm helping you out more than you're helping me out. So Giant finally says, listen, this is what you can do. You can come. I'm going to take the dwarf over to the castle over there, and I'm going to see what I can get for him over that way, because the dwarf is an oddity in these parts. Maybe it's worth something, because clearly you guys have nothing to offer. You can come with me or not. So he grabs the dwarf and starts walking off towards the castle. The party ends up following him. And there was some kind of interesting banter about whether they could then ambush the giant in the woods on their way to travel. And I said, you're welcome to try. And they had some ideas like, what if I run back behind a tree and then draw my sword and then come out and stab him? I'm like, well, the giant's walking. If you go behind a tree, draw your sword, you're going to end up being some distance from the giant. So you're going to have to run at him. Like, he's going to see you coming, essentially. And I said, oh, and by the way, the giant's not at ease with you. The giant's not relaxed. The giant knows, has an idea that what's the most obvious thing you might do. And then, like, he's not unprepared. And, by the way, he's got the dwarf who's now all tied up, tied up the dwarf and everything. So the dwarf's in a sensitive spot. So they having discussed it, I let them discuss it kind of meta on their own. And they determined that there was no way they could take this giant out without there being some loss of life. Probably the dwarf, most likely somebody else, before they were able to get this giant down, and the dog. So they decided, all right, we're just going to walk. So they walk up, and this time they're seeing the castle from the daylight, and it's very, I told them, like, it's kind of got like a Disney castle. It's just very ornate, lots of fluting, and it has a shiny, like, if you remember how they did Camelot in Excalibur, where it's like they had like plating, like it had like plating on it. It was kind of shiny, it had this very kind of shiny, glistening thing. It's just very exaggerated, very much like someone's imaginative version of a castle. And they go inside, and they haven't the giant basically is like, I want an audience with your lord. And they come in, and he trades them in for a favor from the elf. And when I say he trades them in, I mean literally the giant goes like, oh yeah, I brought you all these guys, and I'm trading you for a favor. And the fairy lord's like, fair enough, you have my favor, which you can then cash in. It's basically like favors like an IOU you can cash in for something later. Jorga says, crone plate. Yeah, pretty much. So the giant cashes them in and then leaves. And at one point, later on, the players are like, hey, wait a minute. Like, because then now the lord's like, well, now I own you. Great. And here's where something interesting came in. A long time ago, they were given this flute, which they could use. And some of you who's followed some of these things might remember the flute. They used it, and they used it very flippantly to contact this other fairy power that they had met. And it was a one-use flute. They used it up, but they were kept thinking like, oh, can it work again? Can it work again? Maybe we can get it to work again. The other player who left had taken this flute and tried to have it copied. And I don't know what his plan was. But he was going to make copies of the flute, and that way he could kind of give out fake magic flutes. But he got double-crossed by the person the craftsman who used it to copy the flute, gave them a copy also, and then ran away. There's a misadventure in there. Well, what happened was there was a question that the players started discussing about, like, why did the hole open up and drop us here? This question of why were we dropped here in the fairyland? Like, what is the significance of this place? What is the connection to this place? And I was thinking about it, and I was thinking about this fairy lord that they're now meeting, who I determined was a collector of things. And I thought about it, and I said, why not that here's where the flute has ended up? That the flute has ended up in this place, and that's the connection. So when the party is talking to the elf lord after the giant leaves, and now they're trying to figure out what to do, and the fairy lord's like, great, like you're now amongst my collection. Let me show you some other things I have, some wonderful things. He shows them the flute, and the party's like, the flute. Oh, that flute. I knew it. And it was great because this is a great moment to get something else kind of coming back around where I was able to kind of tie it back in. They're like, oh, that flute. I wonder what happened. And they're like, what happened to the guy? Who brought you the flute? What happened to it? And the player's like, I don't know. He was this man was troubled. This human was troubled greatly by the flute, brought them nothing but bad luck. So they traded it in to me, and now I have it. And like, I have you. So the party's like, but the guy's like, listen. The fairy's like, listen, I can, what do you got going on here? I can see various things on you, and I'll make you a deal. I don't need to hold you here. I'll let you go, but I'll do something for you, and I want to trade you because they're holding on to this bundle still that this other fairy power had given them. And this, to me, I have this whole thing. This is where the whole original part of the setting was politics. These fairies are all about politicking, and as one of the players, they finally like the light went off. He's like, you know what? These fairy folks, they're really into knowledge. They want to know stuff. Like, this is what they're all about. And I'm like, yes. It's like you're picking up on. I mean, granted, it's the kind of stuff they ask for. It's like, yes, knowledge is the currency, information. What kind of leverage can they get on other things? So when he sees that they have a package from this other fairy, he's like, I want to know what this fairy was doing. I want to know what is this fairy up to? And I can get like I can get some leverage on them. And the fairy points out, like, listen, I could just take it from you, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to help you out because you obviously took on this task. Again, another messenger style delivery task that they're going to fail to do. And, what did this fairy offer you? And they said, oh, the fairy offered us to undo this dragon's curse. I'm like, okay, listen, I will undo the dragon's curse. You give me the package instead. And they're like, well, what about the other fairy? And they're like, well, deals are deals. What about that other fairy? Like, you don't even know if they can do what they say they're going to do. I tell you I'm going to do what I say I'm going to do, and I'm here, and you're here, and it doesn't look like you're going to be able to complete the quest anyway if things stand because you were bargained to me. At which point one of the players goes like, hey, wait a minute, I wasn't held hostage. And then the fairy replies and says, he didn't argue when he did the bargain, which he didn't. When the giant said, like, I offer you these guys, all of them, the player didn't say anything. So he, to the fairy, it's like you submitted to that bargain when you did not object at the moment from being bargained. You basically implicitly agreed that you were something that could be bargained. So he's like, I'll make this deal with you. You give me the parcel, and yeah, you're gonna break that other covenant with that other fairy. Yeah, you're gonna break it. Sorry, but you'll be. I'll be able to free you from the curse, and I'll let you go. And they agree. They say, you know what? Fine. We're going to do it. We're not having much luck with this particular quest. Now we can get rid of this stupid dragon curse. Brian Smith says, how many sessions are we spanning in this recap? Probably 3 or 4. Brian Smith. This is probably the culmination of 3 or 4 sessions. This last piece is in the last part of the last session. At least 3 or 4, though I may have covered a little more ground than that. But yeah, 3 or 4. So they go, fine, we're going to do it. All right. So he opens up the parcel and reads it, and then he starts to laugh. And the party's like, what are you laughing at? He says, let me show you. And I decided to pull a little Hamlet, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern kind of action. If you're not familiar with kind of Hamlet, at one point Hamlet is kidnapped, or he's going to be taken to taken to England, and he was given, I think, and Rosencrantz and Guildenstern was taken to England and give him some letters. It's been a long time, but basically give him some letters, basically say, like, kill Hamlet. Like, here, King of England, can you please kill Hamlet for us? But then Hamlet does a little switcheroony, ends up giving the King of England letters that say, please kill Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. So in this case, the package they were handling around was a bundle of agreements. The bottom line was, please, page of the Pinnacle Court, kill the people holding this letter. And in there, as like co-signer to these agreements, is their old friend Bogwig. So I threw Bogwig back in to kind of bring him back. And this, they couldn't believe this. They were like, oh, Bogwig, like what? How did this? Who? How? Like it was a great moment. Their old friend Bogwig made a deal with the witch to send them up the river, keep them in the fairyland, and basically kill them off. And of course, and this was the great. This was like, I felt like this was like the crowning moment. Was one of the guys said, "This is how it works, because if they kill us, that will take care of the curse. That she will have fulfilled the bargain of getting rid of the dragon's curse because by having us killed, therefore they will get rid of the curse. So she's able to keep her word." And I hadn't even thought about this, and I was like, "Yes, that's exactly true." Like I had not thought of that at all. It was totally like, but I'm like, yes, indeed. You have seen the wisdom. Oh, the fairy bargains, how they twist their words. But yeah, so Bogwig got to come back in. Yes, the big bad evil guy. Bogwig probably will end up being the BBEG, but when it's all said and done, that they made themselves. I got to throw him back in the mix, kind of remind them that Bogwig's out there causing them mischief. And also, what I liked about it too was by having it, they've kind of made an enemy of some sorts of this witch. Not a huge enemy, not as much as they may think, because the witch knows, like, I sent them to die, basically. And so it's like, yeah, there's a little bit of like, fair enough, I sent you on this bargain to die. It's like, yeah, you didn't fulfill my bargain, and I'm mad at you for that. But this bargain was also going to kill you. So like, I get it. There's a little bit of a pragmatism to like, I get it. We could still probably make it work if they run into this person in the future, but they might that person might also need to take some steps, just because can't have people making a habit of this. But I got you, kind of thing. So I got to again bring a couple of loose ends together, bring Bogwig kind of back into the fore. The guy this fairy is going to be good to his word and take care of the dragon's curse for them, though there are going to be some consequences for that. I think I'm going to borrow a little bit from Berserk, and they're going to be marked, and at least the one guy's going to be marked, and it's going to kind of be like a dragon mark. Like you can't totally just get rid of it without a trace. A frenemy, Terrence, exactly, a frenemy. But they're gonna be that. So that's kind of where we left it. Is they're going to undergo the ritual for the dragon's curse and do that. Now, I think the big thing that's just reiterating over and over again is that I would say if you've almost an hour and 15 minutes, I'm trying to wrap this up, is that concept of leaving blank spaces in your world building, in your plotting, in your whatever, in your game, because you can bring them back around. Like I had all these blank spots, and then as I get inspired, as things happen, I can then weave those threads back in. Okay, what happened to the flute? I don't know. I just know it got stolen. Like, I don't know what happened, but it just, to me, when the question came up of what is their connection to this place, why did they get transported here? To me, I all of a sudden like, well, there's the flute. There's some connection between them and the flute. Maybe that's what brought them there. Something to do with that. Like, why did that happen? Well, maybe it's something to do with the flute. They may never pull on that thread again. They know where the flute is now. They know where that thread's wrapped. And now I'm like, I have that kind of little bit of an answer. It's not a complete answer, but it's part of an answer. Okay, the flute's here. The flute is connected to them. Maybe that was kind of working on that. Well, what is happening over here? Well, I don't know. And rather than, if I had made explanations for these things back when they happened, they're not nearly as good as what's happened now. So I left this stuff kind of open. I didn't know what was in the parcel. I had no idea what was in that parcel they were carrying around. I kept thinking about, like, well, what is it going to be when they get to the Pinnacle Court? They're going to give it to the page. Like, what is it? Like, I don't know. But the thing is, I didn't define it in advance. I'm like, I'm going to wait until they open it or somebody else opens it or something happens, and then I can see like what it means. And so this seemed like a fun way to do it, to add some more fuel to the fire, to add some stuff. I'm like, that makes fun. Now, is this maybe the best way, the use of that pamphlet, of that material? Could there have been a better use for it? Maybe. Like, I'm not saying it's the best of all possible solutions, but I left it open so that I could fill it when it made sense to fill it. And I find over and over again, when I do that, the stuff I come up with in the moment or that fits the context of the moment is superior to what I would have thought about 2 months ago when they picked up the parcel, or whenever it was, when they picked up the parcel. That's not nearly as interesting. This is. And because I leave it open, I always think about, hey, nothing is really established until it hits the world. So now that's the world story. And now obviously I can't change from there, but then that's it. And I think what's happened now is a lot more fulfilling, drives more gears forward than if it had just been like, oh, well, what could it be? Like, I don't know, a Sudoku, a crossword puzzle? Like, I don't know. No, this is a lot better. And there's still other threads that are laying out there, but I just like to let them dangle, and then I'll find a spot, if I can, where I can just kind of plunk it back in. Or I wait until the party all of a sudden goes, oh, yeah, what about that thread out there? And then that makes me think about it. And so much more has happened since that thread's come up that I'm going to have a lot more material. And I think it made it meaningful. Like one of the players said, like, which is always nice to hear as a GM, he's like, I'm going to ask questions about this, but I can't right now because my mind is blown. I was like, oh, I'm like, that's great to hear that there can be some surprise in a good way and not surprise and like, oh, I can't believe that happened. So it was a lot of fun. There was a lot happened. But it was a good time was had by all, a lot of revelations, some twists and some turns. And now we're going to see what the party's going to do with this new information once they're freed from the dragon's curse. What are they going to do? What are they going to do about Bogwig? And Bogwig does kind of tie back in because, yeah, the Viscount is the one who exiled them, and Bogwig is attached to the Viscount. Who knows? By the time they get home, maybe Bogwig will be in charge, because one thing that they haven't really thought about is there is time dilation while they're in Fairyland. And they've been there for a stretch. This is the longest they've been in Fairyland. So I'm not sure how much time dilation has taken place, but I'm looking forward to having a nice little, being able to really give a world update when they get back and see how many weeks or months have passed by the time they get home, if they get home. Who knows even know what they'll do. The Dave says, it sounds like it was a fantastic set of games. Yeah, I think so. I'd like to think so. I think they're definitely enjoying it. I mean, and I think that these added some nice wrinkles. We'll see where it goes. I am cognizant that I'm well over time, so I'm going to wrap it up here. Tomorrow should be the Reddit roundup as per normal. If you give a thumbs up on your way out, that'd be awesome. If you found yourself in here and you're not subscribed and you feel like subscribing, because this is the kind of stuff we do most days, that would also be awesome. Before I will do more reminders, but I'm going to be in the United Kingdom next week visiting family. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to stream at all or what I'm going to do. I will post other updates. So it may be a break for a week. I might try to sneak something in. We'll see what the schedule is with the Familia. But just know that next week it might be a vacation week or just one or two things. We will see. The Dave says the Feywild should always mess with the world's time. There's a reason elves don't age. Yeah, I think so too. And I want it to be weird. And that was kind of one of my driving factors was how can I keep making stuff weird? Because I found like if I didn't keep thinking about making it weird, it would turn too conventional. So I kept having to fight myself. Like, no, it's got to be weird. Got to be weird. Terrence says Bogwig is steer piking his way to the top. I hope so. I like Bogwig. I hope he hangs around for a while. All right, folks. Game on. Have a great rest of your day, night, whenever you end up watching or listening to this. And I'll talk to you later. Bye now.